6 trends changing China's car market. Now this is thoughtful. Hello, I'm Trevor Lai in Shanghai. Now the world's largest car market, China has expanded from nearly 6 million units in 2005 to a predicted 25 million in 2016, according to a recent report from Stern Agee. But that doesn't mean it's an easy market, with trends like oversaturation in some categories. This week on Thoughtful China, our guest is Bryce Whitwam, Managing Director Shanghai of Wunderman, a regular guest on our show as well as a leading expert on auto marketing in this market. Bryce, thanks for joining us again on Thoughtful China.
Glad to be here, Trevor.
You've identified 6 trends changing China's car market. Let's start with where the audience is. You're arguing that customers are now going to be moving towards 5th-tier cities. Why?
Well, because it's the greatest opportunity market. As you know, the largest population of Chinese is within Tier 5 and lower. And that to the car business is the greatest opportunity.
What are some of the differences, though, in 5th-tier cities versus Shanghai or Beijing?
I think the biggest difference is probably more about price sensitivity. People there will be more price conscious about what they choose. They'll be looking for more value placements, and they're probably more interested or susceptible to locally branded cars, locally made cars versus Tier 1 or Tier 2 Beijing, Shanghai markets, which maybe have more of a stronger affinity towards import cars.
And are there any brands that have already made some good headway into 5th-tier or lower cities?
I think all the joint venture brands, joint venture cars and import cars have all gone into this market because they know that's the greatest potential. And we talk about Tier 5, we're actually talking Tier 5 and below, so even to Tier 7 and Tier 8. A lot of them are actually now building cars specifically for this market. The first one comes to mind is the Ford Escort, which is a car which has a familiar name to most Americans and Europeans. But this car is specifically designed for the lower tier markets. It has all the family features, but has a more reasonable price.
And one of the trends that you also identified touches on price sensitivity. Obviously in the luxury sector, a lot of the brands have been hurt, probably not just because of the government austerity measures, but also other factors, the overall slowing of the economy, and perhaps some more sensitivity about the types of brands that you're buying at the upper end, and also the proliferation of models available across all the luxury brands. So can you talk about why there's a slowdown in luxury?
I think it's a lot of reasons I think that you just touched on. I think with increased competition, increased what we call premium or mid-tier traditional car markets have provided more luxury features. So when people start doing rational comparisons, they find out that a lot of their Volkswagens, their Fords, their Toyotas are actually comparable in terms of features to those luxury market cars. Those, I think, are the key reasons. The third reason is that as more cars come into the market, you're seeing a natural affinity to lower the prices. We've seen that with all the big German 3, BMW, Mercedes, all dropping their prices. That allows more, let's say, mid-tier car brands to come into play, but it also feeds more competition to compete for that market.
Now, when you say they're dropping their prices, are you saying that they're specifically for China lowering their retail price because of the fact that their sales have slowed down so dramatically that they need to make up that volume? So in some cases, would they be selling at a loss? Or are you saying they're reducing their profit margins? So before they might have been enjoying a healthy profit margin, and now they're just lowering that slightly.
I think it's a bit of both. I think, yes, there's that fact that they've had to, there's been pressure from the government to offer more reasonable prices within China. At the same time, there's also that competitive nature of the market that's allowing them to, if they want to increase the demand and the supply that they have to be able to adjust their prices accordingly.
And at the same time, we've also seen proliferation of some of the smaller niche brands, including Aston Martin just announced a joint venture deal with, I think it's Le TV. So you're seeing some of the smaller luxury brands trying to carve out a namesake for themselves. Now, they've only sold 300 vehicles in, I think, the last several years combined. Do you still think that even as luxury overall is diminishing, that China's market for that segment is still going to grow in the long run?
Absolutely. It will still continue to grow. And you'll see people like Aston Martin, Maserati, even Bentley, they're all going to put big plays into China. Whilst that maybe it isn't the good old days of the luxury market like we were expecting, the market will still continue to grow. It'll be more competitive, and the luxury brands will have to work harder to sell their cars. But it's still going to see an increased market.
And of course, one of the biggest players now are the local players. And Haval, also known as Great Wall, claims they have the #1 SUV in China, the H6, H8. Can you talk about their rise and what have been some of the factors leading to their success?
Yeah, it's an interesting point because the last 2 months of the year, the first 2 months of 2015, we saw an increase of SUV sales by 36%. The total market increased 9%. So SUVs are still hot. Despite that, out of the top 10 SUVs in China, only 2 are JVs, the Ford Kuga and the Volkswagen Tiguan. What they're doing essentially is offering more reasonable prices. Now the prices are down to the 80,000 range. It offers a much more opportunity for these local players to come into, as we mentioned, the Tier 5 to Tier 7 markets and offer them a much more priced comparative opportunity. At the same time, the features like the Haval are pretty much moving up to the standards of the traditional joint venture companies, offering people a much more comparable comparison, let's say, feature to feature with the traditional JV players.
When we look at other countries, let's say in Asia, where you look at the Korean market and you look at the Japanese market, there is a very strong nationalistic component to car purchase sales. When you go into Korea and you see the proliferation of Kia and Hyundais on the road. In China, for many, many years, the tremendous growth here was driven by foreign brands and some of the brands that you've talked about in the joint ventures. But as these local brands sort of take a larger and larger chunk of the market, how do JVs and how do foreign brands compete?
I think that, yeah, there's no question that nationalism plays a big part in Japan and Korea in terms of car purchases. I think in China, Chinese people, whilst they're very nationalistic, they have a more practical sense when they're going to put down money for an automobile. And they will buy a locally made car when they know it's on par with the foreign player car in terms of quality. Look at the television market now, it's a good example of that. Local televisions are predominant in the market. I think cars is the same way. I think for foreign companies and JV partners, they still have great opportunity to expand and grow in the market. They can still provide the upper hand, so to speak, on technology and in features of the car. They can also provide enhanced services because they have a lot of experience abroad in terms of owner experiences, in terms of that full 360 kind of experience that you get before you buy the car and after you buy the car, that will essentially give them the upper hand in terms of the local players, which I think will still need to catch up in those aspects.
So moving beyond the hardware and competing really on services and added value.
It's true. Yeah, because when we say when you buy a car, you buy a brand and a service. You don't buy a physical thing. And that car experience actually continues throughout the ownership journey. The reality, yeah.
Yeah, and sorry, and actually for dealerships, that's where they make their money now.
No, you're right. Absolutely. Most of the car companies are selling at a very thin margins for the actual retail price of the car. They make the big bucks after sales. That's what they're really playing for in terms of the after sales business. And I think that JV companies are still providing a much greater type of service offering, a much more customer for life proposition that I believe that will be more and more important for people.
When you're talking about those thin margins, are they healthier for local companies, or are both local and JV and foreign brands facing the same thin margins? And could you give us examples of what percentage?
Oh, I'm not too sure about what exactly the foreign and local margins are. I do know that most of the car companies operate on the proposition of trying to get people in to buy the cars, and then ultimately to try to get them into an after-sales proposition. I would say, though, that the magic of car business is oftentimes on inventory. And if you can predict your inventory, you'll make money in the car business. We've seen a lot of local players that overproduce and can't sell the goods. And as a result, their margins will be affected.
Well, yes, and one of my friends they own a chain of dealerships, and he said that actually scale in China is critical. The scale in terms of the number of units you need to actually move, because that guarantees in the future the inventory of cars coming in for service.
That's right.
And that's how they predict their cash flows.
That's right. That also comes into your previous question about lower tier markets. As long as you can build that scale in your dealership networks into the lower tiers quicker, you'll have a better chance of increasing your market share for sales of cars.
Now, one of the things that struck me about the car market here, say 10 years ago, is the buying process. You know, you would pay cash, you know, almost in most instances 100%. And now, obviously, we've seen a shift towards credit and financing, which is something that in the West has been happening for decades. How do you see this trend, and has that helped to boost car sales?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot more, I think because there's a couple of reasons, it's increasing a lot. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is obviously that the car business is looking for greater markets and allowing people to have financial packages. The second opportunity has come from the banks and some of the financial institutions have become more flexible in China to offering these things. Before, the biggest stumbling block in offering financial services really that the banks weren't open enough to provide them. So, and then thirdly is a combination of consumers just willing to accept buying on credit. You know, it's still a majority of people still feel uncomfortable about buying on credit here, whilst in like, let's say in the US, where almost 80% of car sales is on credit. Here it's an upcoming trend, but it's a trend nevertheless, and people are becoming more accustomed to credit as they have more opportunities at the dealer to buy cars on credit.
Well, and then that leads to the next question, which is how do dealers and brands now work in terms of retaining loyalty for their cars and their brands within China? Is that a harder proposition with the proliferation of choices, the competition as you mentioned, or is that something that you think certain brands have done a good job of doing in China?
Yeah, I think that loyalty is the biggest growth opportunity in China. If you look at in the past, everyone was pretty much focused on selling that first car. Now, a lot of the markets, especially in the Tier 1 and Tier 2 markets, people who have owned a car, they're sitting on their second and third car. It's vital that the car manufacturers get people into ownership propositions that allow them to retain that customer to the next car and further beyond. If you look at like other markets like Japan and Korea, most car companies could operate on a 20, 26, 30% loyalty rate. In China, that would be amazing. Right now, a lot of the loyalty percentages are around 5, 6%. So you can see where the growth opportunity is. Obviously, I'd like to say that my client at Wunderman Ford is a great example of loyalty. They have a full range of services that they provide for the client, for the customers, to allow them to give opportunities to stay both within the Ford world because of the great service, but also they have a full range of models to get them to trade up. So opportunities, for example, if you're a Ford Focus owner and you want to buy one of those SUVs, that Ford has an SUV option for you.
And but aside from allowing you to choose from a variety of models, are there financial benefits? Are there privileges for being a previous Ford owner that they're allowing customers to enjoy in China?
Certainly. There's opportunities to recommend friends of friends to be able to purchase cars. There are certain incentives offered if you buy a second car. There's all sorts of opportunities and incentives to give to these customers to keep them in the Ford world.
And now the last trend that you've talked about is the rise of e-commerce and the importance of this. Now, obviously, several years ago, there were headlines made by Tuango where people were group buying certain vehicles online. But now as the market has settled down and matured a little bit, what are some of the other biggest trends in e-commerce and how it's affecting the car market in China?
I think it's a really new thing in terms of e-commerce and how it works. I think most of the car companies are still experimenting. They know that they have to be a part of it because, like everything else, car business is becoming fundamentally an online proposition. Now, why not allow people the incentive to go from awareness to consideration to actual purchase? Now, the purchase part is not really that fully baked yet, and most of the times people are simply putting deposits online for the cars. Having said that, though, all the car companies are investing in Tmall propositions. It's really about getting into the face of the customer in every possible channel. If you feel that people are spending a great deal of their time on e-commerce platforms, it makes sense for them to see a Ford or a Volkswagen or a Nissan proposition on their e-commerce platform as well.
So let's just quickly summarize the 6 key trends for the car market in China.
So the first big trend is move to the lower tier markets. We'll see much more emphasis on trying to expand markets, both in terms of offering of products and also of dealer networks. The second one is about let's say the change within the luxury car business, moving from just a pure sales opportunity to provide a whole service proposition as their competition begins to heat up. The third proposition, or the third big trend, is about financial offers. As the markets expand and the banks become more willing to give financial incentives, you'll see a lot more financial opportunities and more Chinese people buying on credit. The fourth big trend is about the emphasis on owners and loyalty. Now that consumers are on their second and third cars purchases, it makes more and more sense for car companies to keep people within their family, and so that they go from one car family to the next and stay within the brand. That's also important in terms of after-sales business as well. The other trend is about the rise of e-commerce and how more and more car companies are trying to get that foothold into e-commerce, not just as a way to sell more cars, but also to gain more eyeballs within the e-commerce platforms where people frequently visit.
So you were recently at the Shanghai Auto Show. Can you talk about some of the highlights?
Well, first of all, the exhibition center is massive. It's the largest in the world. It used to be in Pudong, now it's near the Hongqiao airport, and it's something amazing to see. The second big trend, I think, was that every single car dealer, local, premium, mid-market to luxury brand, has all some sort of SUV offering, whether it's called city SUV, mid-tier SUV, 7-seat SUV. I mean, there are so many different types of SUVs, and what everyone's calling an SUV is also kind of an interesting thing as well. Everything's called an SUV.
There's more crossovers now and hybrid, SUVs.
Well, they used to call them crossovers. Now it's SUV. So since the car business is hot on SUVs, as I previously mentioned, now everybody's giving you an SUV. And it's a choice of SUVs from the smallest to the largest.
Bryce, thanks for coming in today. That wraps it up for today. Be sure to subscribe to us on Youku, Tudo, and YouTube. You can also follow us on Weibo and Twitter and join our LinkedIn group. We'll see you again.